Hello. This video is about triggers. Triggers are similar to colliders, but they're typically invisible, and well, you could kind of use one for the other, but triggers, well, they exist. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a trigger, and a trigger could be used to when the person walks through a door, it turns the lights on, or activates the monsters, or makes a doorbell sound, or whatever you want the trigger to do. In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to turn the gravity off on the rock and the ball, and we're going to set up a trigger. And when the player enters the trigger, it's going to turn gravity on. So they're going to stay there. So the bucket of water over the doorway could work. So let's see. Let's make a new object called trigger, gravity trigger. Oops. And for some reason it does that. Reset to get that to all zeros so I know where it is. Oh yeah, there was a slight bug I discovered. Click on player and leave its values where it is right now. And if you watch over here, if you click on capsule, oops, son of a gun. If they're not the same, so the player is here, and when you click on capsule, if they don't appear the same, change these to zeros. I found a bug where I may have accidentally in the class set these to non-zero. We want them to be the same. When I first tried this video, it triggered way too early, and I found out that I had accidentally set the capsule ahead of the player. You can see in the left picture in the scene view. And so it kept triggering at the wrong time. It was driving me crazy until I figured I accidentally did not have these set to zero. So if I haven't said it before, this is the kind of the parent object, and this is the child object. So in the world, the player is at this coordinates. The capsule is always relevant, the child element in this case, the capsule, is always relevant to the parent. So it's 0, 0 to the parent, so it's in the same place. The main camera is at the same place, but that script will fix it when it starts and make it follow camera. Alright, so just make sure the player, let's move it back some, so we can have plenty of time for a trigger. Set it way back, and then make sure the capsule is still at 0. Alright, so back to what I was doing. The gravity trigger, I'm going to put it between the player and the rock, so I don't have to dance around to find it. And let's see, line ourselves up. So yeah, that's about right. Now, if just for the heck of it, player is at minus 4.3, we could Control-C copy, gravity trigger, paste. Now they're perfectly lined up. Right? And then we want to see it, so we're going to do a 3D object, a cube. And we're going to make the cube bigger by stretching. We want it wider, so that would be that direction. We want it taller, so that would be that direction. And then I'm going to grab the green arrow and drag it down until it's at the ground. Easier in this video to see at the bottom picture. Just low enough that we make sure we can't, walk under it. Okay, file save. And then under materials, so under assets, resources, reusable in this case, because it's not unique to this, I'm going to make a transparent blue. So I'm going to create, by right-clicking on materials, create a new material that I'm going to call, say, I like them to sort alphabetically. So now it's blue and blue transparent. If I would have said transparent blue, then the T would have been down here, and I go, well, I know I had a blue. Anyway, so we're going to go up here on blue transparent. You can name them anything you want, but if you get too far away from what I call them, you might get confused as to which one you use. Then we're going to set this, obviously, to transparent. And then I'm going to pick, we called it blue, a blue. And then we're going to change the alpha down Oh yeah, it's not doing it because it's not on that. So let's move that on to that cube. Okay. So let's go back here and move the alpha back up so we can see it a bit easy. We want to know where a real trigger you might not see, but this could be a pane of glass, right? But in this case, we want to see that we're going through it. So I just picked some arbitrary blue, an arbitrary alpha so that we could see it. The exact value doesn't really matter. This is set to transparent, and then of course I had to put it on the cube so that it was applied to that particular object. I dragged it from here to the cube. You could drag it from here to the cube here. And let's rename this to gravity trigger cube. And you can pick different names, and obviously, in this case, there's only one cube, but sometimes, like when we're doing the debugging and it detects a collision, it'll say cube, and you'll go, which one was it? Right? So it's just a little extra effort to rename these, and it saves a lot during debugging, because you might have to go back and go, oh shoot, now I need to know which of the 80 cubes it is. I've got to rename them all. So you might as well just do it while you're in here. And again, I like the camel case. You can put spaces in these names, but again, I don't like that because some programs don't, and I don't want to remember which ones do and which ones don't, so I just don't. Like up here, I think that's actually a space in the name, the directional light, and it is. Okay, so this one's got 2 spaces. So, but I'm not going to rename them because I'm not messing with them. The same with main camera, right? It's got a space in it. It comes up with one of those by default. So we've got the gravity trigger and the gravity cube, and let's go sideways here. We're sufficiently back, the player is sufficiently back from the cube so that we won't like drop into it and be confused. And file save because I tweaked something the last time. We've turned the gravity off on the rock. Alright, so the first thing we want to do is I want to switch to console here and clear and hit run and see if it detects a collision as it rethinks. Okay, we collided with the floor, yes. Boom, we collided with the cube, but it's transparent, but we can't walk through it. That's normal because we have a rigid body. So we stop this, clear everything out. Or does it? Oh, let's make this a trigger. I forgot. We have a box collider, but it's just a trigger. Let's see. So the only thing I'm changing right now is that it's a trigger instead of a collider because we don't want to collide with it. Let's see what happens when I do that. Boom. By the way, I modified the volume since the last video of the ouch audio, so when you get it, it will be as loud as interesting. Okay, I don't know why it fell the first time. It shouldn't have fallen. We don't have the code in there to activate the trigger yet. Let's see if it does that again. That was kind of strange. Clear. Run. And maybe I forgot to turn it off and thought I did. Let's see what happens. It's falling. Oh, yeah, I didn't. It's just that the rock was low enough that I hit it. Alright, I thought maybe it had fallen and I was getting all confused. Alright, so we knock this zero gravity rock up. But what we want to do is we want to turn gravity on. Now, let's minimize all of this because we don't need it. It'll be in the way. We're going to make a new script. And the new script is going to be, so we're going to right click here. We're going to add it to the cube, kind of, right? We want it so that when it collides with the cube. So let's call this new script. Okay. If I click on the cube, I could add the script here by scrolling down, saying new script, and entering its name. When I do that, however, it sets it wherever it wants to in here. This particular script is unique to this game, so I'm going to select here, right click, and say script. Now it creates the new one here. And let's call this gravity trigger script. And what I'm doing is generally one or a few things per script. If you're a programmer, you sometimes write a program with a lot of methods in it, but in Unity programming, it's a good idea to just have one thing per script, because you can drag 15 scripts up onto an object. It doesn't hurt. But when you make one monolithic script, then later on, if you need just parts of it, you're carrying around all this weight and you don't need it. All right, so now that we've created this, we're going to double click on it. It should bring it up. There we go. Now don't forget to put your copyright in every file you do. Copyrights, you think it means I own it, you can't use it. It actually means I own it. So by putting your copyright in a file, it's saying, even if I give it to you, it's still my copyright, and you don't get to say you did it. So 5 years from now, if you're making $1 million a day on your game, and somebody else that used one of your scripts, they can't come back and say, wait a minute, I wrote that script, it's mine, right? But by putting the copyright, and you'll have that file with the copyright then all over the place where you've backed up stuff, it would be pretty obvious that you wrote the code long before the other person who borrowed it from you did. So it doesn't just protect you from, stealing it all, it protects you from people saying you stole it. And it protects your rights later on if they're not supposed to have the code at all. But anyway, so put your copyright in there. My copyright is a little different for this, and I may modify it before the class is out. Here it says it's copyright RiverExplorer. You have permission to use this. You can use it in your class. You can use it for personal projects and use it for commercial projects without payment. All of that. But I think I'm going to add a line that says, but you can't share the code with anybody. I'm not sure if I'm going to do that. But because I want to make money selling this to the universities, this class. No, I probably won't put it in there. But you see the thought process. Anyway, with copyrights. Let's go back down to gravity trigger script with your name up here. And in this case, we don't really want, or do we want? We're going to make the rock, and we're going to make the go back to scene here, the rock and the ball, that's what it was, fall, but only after we enter the trigger. So, and those are game objects, right? When you make a new empty, it's a game object. We just renamed it. I'm deleting this. So, and in a lot of these scripts, you'll see stuff over here, right? And you go, oh, I don't know, somebody must have done a lot of work. Well, it's actually not that much work. So we're going to go down here to the cube, and we're going to add the gravity trigger script to the cube. Or maybe it goes on gravity trigger. We'll play with that. I sometimes forget. And it's a trigger, the gravity trigger cube, and it's got this script on it right now, but you'll notice this doesn't have a bunch of stuff like in here like these do. It's just empty. And how you make stuff that you tweak is really simple. Again, somebody invented names to use. They have no special meaning on their own. Serialized field means it's going to show up in the inspector. And what do we want? We want at least 2 game objects. I could say game object trigger, serialized game object ball, but later on we might want to do 3, and I would have to keep changing the code over and over again. So instead, is what we do is we say delete this, delete all of this, and start over. It's very similar. Serialized field. It's going to be a game object still, but we want more than one. And this means an array. An array means 0 or more of something. And I'm going to call this gravity objects. Okay, oops, and then I'm going to get rid of this mess I made. My typo. There we go. Okay, so, and then I'm going to do File Save, and watch what happens over here when it recompiles it. We called it Gravity Objects, right? And it made something, because I'm using camel case, it knew to split the words at the case when it goes from lowercase to uppercase. And this allows us to add two things. And of course, we're going to add the rock, and we're going to add the ball. Where's the ball? There's the ball. All right, so we could write the code in here to go find them, which maybe we'll do in another lesson, but most of the time I will do it this way to make sure that I'm getting this rock and this ball and not some other one named the same thing that I forgot that some other script had. And let's see. All right, so I've said I want this to show up in the inspector window. We're doing game objects, 0 or more of them, and we're calling it gravity objects. And we don't need to start or update, do we? I don't think. No, we don't need to do these. Start is whenever the script starts, you can run some code, and every frame update. And updates, there's one called fixed update, which is every frame. Update is kind of about every frame, but it tries to balance it, and you can read up on how that's done with Google on Unity. But we do need a private, meaning nobody else is going to use this but us. Void, meaning we're going to do something, but we're not going to return anything. On trigger, enter. Now, Visual Studio knew what the argument was here, so I didn't have to remember this. I just hit the tab key. If this was add, instead of saying on trigger, if it said add and I passed it a value 1 and a value 2, then I would say return value 1 plus sign value 2, and then it would return a number. But when it says void, it just does stuff for us without returning anything as a result. So let's see, what do we need to do? You'll recall that the rigid body is the one that has the gravity, right? So I'm going to create a variable here called rigid body. It knows it, so I'm going to hit tab. I'm going to call it RB. And then for each variable object in gravity objects. That kind of makes sense when you just read it. Now, it's showing game objects for me, and that's something you can configure in Visual Studio. For you, it might just say VAR with nothing here. That's what I do, is I don't like var object, right? Because I want to know what I'm expecting. So I can double click here, and it replaces it with what it really is. For each game object in gravity objects, and there's 0 or more, we want to say the rigid body for this one equals get component, and it knew what to do. So basically, for the object up here, find the rigid body component, and for that particular object, and then we'll say, oops, rigid body, I'm going to type gravity, okay, so use gravity, equals true. It even knew what I wanted to do. Now you see how this ends like without return statement, but I always like a return statement, because sometimes during debugging I want to stop after this happens, and so that gives me a line. If I press here, I can debug and stop here. We'll do debugging in a little bit. I'll show it to you. But that's why I always add a return even to a void, which doesn't actually return anything. So I'm returning, if I return something, I would return a value, right? But I'm not returning anything, so I'm just returning from the script. So in gravity trigger script, make sure yours looks a lot like this. Now you'll see it says using up here, and these are grayed out. By default, when you make a script, it gives you all three. But because it's gray, it's saying we're not using them. So whenever that happens, we can just delete them. It's kind of, or you can keep them, it doesn't hurt. But we're not really using that. Unity Engine is the code that knew about game object, it knew about rigid body, and I knew that use rigid body had a gravity. That's what Unity Engine comes with, because it's kind of the stuff that's built into Unity. All right, so on the trigger cube, we have the gravity trigger script, and it supposedly works for the rock and the ball. Oh yeah, let's see what the box collider looks like for that. Does it look correct? Yes, it looks correct, right? It's about the same size. And I'm hitting play. So we can watch these top scene and below what the player view is. Then watch the rocks as I try to slowly go forward. Oops, nothing happened. Now let's go to debug. Right? What did I do wrong? Well, first thing you do is you go to the console and see if you got an error. And we certainly did. There is no rigid body attached to gravity trigger cube. Oops. Okay. So the gravity trigger cube doesn't have a rigid body. That's because I did it wrong. I didn't want the rigid body of the object it was attached to. I wanted the rigid body of the object we're talking about. I hit Control V accidentally. Control C. Right, now I want to get the rigid body of the object. All right? And that's another common mistake in here. If you whenever you attach a script to a game object, it always assumes that you're talking about that game object and not another one. And this was actually a typo. I mean, I wasn't planning this error, but that's what happened. And I've done it before, right? I meant to say object.getComponent, but instead I did this, which was the gravity trigger cube that does not have a rigid body. But now you know what happens when. So let's check that in case someone's like me's a bozo again. If rigid body does not equal null, then we'll turn the gravity on. Otherwise, we're going to do a debug log.debug. Log error, if I could think right. You forgot the object in gravity objects does not have a rigid body. And then I'm going to say gravity trigger.cs. So in gravity trigger.cs, the object does not have a rigid body. And, oh yeah, I got to enter the line with all the semicolons. And let's even tell it which one. Instead of saying the object, I'm going to say object.name. So now it'll say in gravity trigger.cs, object.name, whatever the name of the object is, in gravity object does not have a rigid body. So if I have 10 things here, it'll tell me which one doesn't have a rigid body, which point I can decide that I shouldn't have added it to this list, or I can decide that I should add a rigid body to whichever one is giving me the error. Another thing that can happen, there's no way to, I don't think there's a way to make this ever null here. So I could add it twice, which wouldn't really hurt. I was trying to add one that was empty, but I don't think you can. Because if you could have, I would have said if object does not equal null up here. But I don't think you can add one that's a null. Anyway, this says we have two, if I collapse this, it says we have two gravity objects, and I can expand it to see what they are. Now let's see, think this through again. When the script attached to the cube gets a trigger enter, and we set a trigger here on the box collider, then it'll tell us. And it should set the gravity to that object to true. Now, if you're not really following all the scripting stuff, that's fine. Just type in the final result and it'll work. Boom. The rock fell, the cube fell. This time, that's interesting. The cube didn't go anywhere after falling. Whoa, we disrupted you, dude. Boom. Push it around. And anyway, gotta have some fun. That concludes triggers. So this is a great trigger script for you to copy. And you basically you create the on-trigger script and you attach it to whatever the trigger is, right? And then you add whatever it is you're going to do something with. And maybe you're not going to say do gravity. Maybe you're going to say call some special function for this, right? Like blow up or something else. And I'm going to do one short video on Unity particle effects. And when you see it, you're going to want me to do a longer video, but it could be hours. So I'll just do a short one and on an explosion probably, or maybe something else. I have to think about it. So I'll see you in the next video.